Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are undertaking both a culinary and a scientific expedition into a small bulb that has truly, truly flavored global civilization for millennia. Garlic, Allium sativum.
Right.
This powerful plant is not only the backbone of countless cuisines, but it's surrounded by this cloud of health claims stretching back to, ancient Egyptian remedies.
Yeah.
Everything from fighting off infectious disease to warding off evil spirits.
And while that folkloric history is fascinating, our mission today is really to cut through that fog of legend and see what modern, trustworthy human clinical science actually says.
Okay.
We are not interested in petri dish experiments or, animal models. We have pulled together a massive consolidated stack of the absolute highest quality human clinical evidence available.
So that means we're dealing with systematic reviews and multiple robust meta-analyses. We're talking well over 100 randomized controlled trials, right?
Exactly.
You're going straight to the top shelf of evidence, the gold standard, to filter out the noise and deliver a clear, reliable assessment to you.
Precisely. We are filtering for what researchers call moderate or high-grade certainty. This means we are only discussing conclusions where the scientific community is highly confident in the therapeutic outcome.
And what's the bottom line right up front?
Well, the immediate biggest picture takeaway for you, the listener, is this. The strongest, most consistent evidence for garlic's therapeutic benefits centers almost entirely around one system: cardiovascular health.
So it's not a panacea, not a cure-all, but it is a legitimate, proven tool for managing the risk factors associated with heart disease.
It is a legitimate, evidence-backed adjunctive tool, provided, and this is key, you use the correct preparation. We will see that standardization is, well, it's everything here, whether you're talking about aged garlic extract or specific garlic powders.
And before we dive into the dense data, because this simple bulb is surprisingly complex, here is a little teaser that highlights just how specific the science is. We will explain why crushing raw garlic and letting it sit on your cutting board for 10 minutes matters more for maximizing potential health benefits than almost any other preparation step you might take.
And conversely, we'll look at why certain odorless pills, which sound appealing, might actually be completely useless for your desired health goals.
Okay, let's unpack this and start with the area of highest confidence: blood pressure reduction. When we look at this vast body of evidence, these numerous systematic reviews, what is the clear quantitative signal for BP management?
The signal is exceptionally clear, and critically, it is clinically relevant. Multiple systematic reviews, including these large meta-analyses covering hundreds, even thousands of hypertensive adults, consistently show that garlic supplementation.
And we're talking specific kinds of supplements here.
Yes, especially using standardized preparations, it results in a significant predictable reduction in both systolic and diastolic blood pressure.
When we say clinically relevant, we mean the effect size is large enough to actually translate into a noticeable impact on a person's long-term health risk. Right? Yeah. Not just some tiny statistically significant wiggle.
Exactly. For individuals diagnosed with established or uncontrolled hypertension, where the systolic BP is typically greater than 140 mmHg, the reductions are not trivial at all.
So what are the numbers?
Typical group reductions hover aggressively around 8 to 12 mmHg for systolic BP and approximately 3 to 6 mmHg for diastolic BP.
Wow. An 8 to 12 millimeter of mercury drop in systolic pressure is, that's truly impressive. To put that in perspective for the listener, what does a drop like that translate to in terms of real-world risk reduction?
Well, in population studies, a reduction of that magnitude, let's just say 10 mmHg systolic, is associated with an estimated 20 to 25% reduction in the risk of major cardiovascular events.
Like stroke and heart attack.
Including stroke and myocardial infarction, yes. So the effect size we see from garlic is often compared favorably in clinical research, the effects achieved by standard low-dose antihypertensive monotherapies or really aggressive sustained lifestyle modifications.
Things that are very hard to maintain, like a full adoption of the DSH diet.
Very difficult, yes. That puts garlic in a completely different category than most over-the-counter supplements.
I remember one key trial using aged garlic extract age showed a huge drop.
Yes, that specific 12-week trial used a dose of 480 milligrams per day of AGE, standardized to deliver 1.2 milligrams of SLE-cysteine or SAC.
Okay.
And in the group with uncontrolled hypertension, they observed an average SBP reduction of almost 12 mmHg compared to the placebo group. The consistency across trials using these standardized products is what gives this finding that high certainty grade status.
That immediately raises a crucial question of selectivity then. Who truly benefits most from this? I mean, does this work if I take a pill every day, even if my blood pressure is fine?
And the data is exceptionally clear on this point. The therapeutic benefit is heavily concentrated in individuals who already have elevated blood pressure.
So it's corrective, not just suppressive.
Precisely. The effect is substantially larger. We're talking 2 to 2.5 times larger in hypertensive adults compared to normotensive subjects who show minimal to no consistent benefit. Garlic appears to correct a pre-existing dysfunction rather than simply push an already healthy system lower.
That's a key distinction. If your blood pressure is already healthy, taking garlic supplements, primarily for BP reduction, is probably going to yield minimal measurable results.
Absolutely. The strongest evidence is for people with a baseline systolic pressure greater than 140, but also for those with prehypertension, in that 130 to 139 range.
What about age?
We also see the clearest benefits appearing in older adults. Key trials often studied cohorts where the mean age was around 70 years, or adults aged 50 to 60 with mild hypertension.
So it might be more pronounced as arterial function naturally starts to decline.
That's the thinking, yes.
Let's move to the fundamental question then, the why. How is this humble bulb managing to interact with our body's complex circulatory systems to mimic the effects of powerful prescription drugs?
The mechanism is really a masterpiece of plant chemistry interacting with human physiology. It involves several pathways, but they all converge on one thing: vasodilation.
The relaxation and widening of blood vessels.
Exactly. It reduces the resistance to blood flow, and that, in turn, lowers pressure.
Okay, let's spend some real time on these mechanisms, starting with one of the most surprising molecules involved.
The first and arguably the most modern focus of garlic research involves the production of hydrogen sulfide, or H2S.
Which I always associate with rotten eggs.
Right, but in the body, it's a crucial signaling molecule. When garlic compounds are metabolized, particularly the allicin metabolites, they promote the production of H2S within the red blood cells and the vascular system.
And that H2S is a vasodilator.
A potent one. Endogenous H2S acts as a powerful protective vasodilator. It signals the smooth muscle cells surrounding the blood vessels to relax. Essentially, the garlic compounds are giving the body the raw materials it needs to create its own natural blood pressure regulator.
So the garlic isn't the final active ingredient. It's co-opting an internal system to create the benefit. That's incredibly sophisticated.
Yeah.
What's the second component?
The second mechanism is closely related to the function of the blood vessel lining, the endothelium. Garlic enhances endothelial function by increasing the bioavailability of nitric oxide, or NO.
NO is probably the best-known vasodilator molecule.
It is, and it's produced by the lining of your blood vessels. And we know that endothelial dysfunction, where that lining doesn't work properly, is often the very first step toward atherosclerosis and hypertension.
Right, a dysfunctional endothelium produces less NO, which leads to stiffer vessels and higher pressure.
That's right. And garlic compounds, through their antioxidant and chemical effects, help restore or enhance the availability of NO, further promoting that vasodilation and improving overall vascular health.
So we have two potent mechanisms for relaxation, H2S and NO. Is there a third component that rounds this out, maybe one that directly challenges the body's mechanisms for constriction?
Yes, and this is the mechanism that ties garlic most closely to modern pharmacology. Evidence suggests that certain garlic compounds may also modulate a key hormonal system known as the angiotensin II second pathway.
Okay.
Specifically, they exhibit AC-angiotensin-converting enzyme inhibition.
That is fascinating because ACE inhibitors are one of the most common first-line prescription blood pressure medications on the planet.
Exactly. Angiotensin-converting enzyme converts a precursor, angiotensin I, into angiotensin II, which is a powerful hormone that causes vasoconstriction. It clamps your arteries shut, raising pressure.
So by modulating or inhibiting ACE,
By doing that, garlic compounds are theoretically mimicking the action of prescription ACE inhibitor drugs, preventing the constriction and allowing the vessels to stay relaxed.
this sounds like a multi-pronged therapeutic attack. We have H2S and NO promoting relaxation, and ACE modulation actively reducing the chemical signals for constriction. It's no wonder the observed BP reductions are so consistently robust.
That's the core synthesis, yes. It's a beautifully complex intervention. A moderate to high certainty effect, highly selective for high BP, driven by three distinct and powerful vascular mechanisms.
Moving beyond just pressure, let's connect this to the overall integrity of the cardiovascular system. Let's look at cholesterol and other markers of arterial damage. If garlic is reducing BP, is it also helping the underlying plumbing, the arteries themselves?
The answer is yes, but we have to immediately introduce a layer of nuance, as the effect sizes here are more modest than the impressive BP drops we just talked about.
Okay.
Meta-analyses do confirm that garlic results in modest but consistent improvements in the lipid profile, but only when used consistently for at least 8 to 12 weeks.
And what are those specific improvements we see in the blood lipid profile?
We see reductions primarily in total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, the so-called bad cholesterol. When we pool the data, particularly from trials involving people who start with elevated baseline cholesterol, hypercholesterolemia, the numbers are consistently in garlic's favor.
So give us the specifics on those pooled reductions.
Pooled reductions typically show total cholesterol dropping around 10 to 17 milligrams per deciliter and LDL cholesterol dropping by approximately 9 milli-GDL.
Right. And just to be honest here, a 9 milli-GDL reduction in LDL is pretty small compared to what a standard statin drug can achieve. I mean, those can hit a 30 to 50% reduction.
That's an excellent and critical point.
So is the effort and expense really worth such a modest drop? Or is this only relevant for a very specific subset of the population?
That is the right question to ask. The effect size is small to moderate. Garlic is absolutely not a statin replacement. The magnitude of benefit is really only clinically meaningful in two scenarios.
Which are?
First, for individuals with mild to moderate elevation, borderline high LDL, who are focused on general dietary optimization and don't yet qualify for aggressive pharmaceutical intervention.
That is second.
Second, it's relevant for patients who have absolute intolerance or contraindications to statin therapy, where even a small adjunctive reduction can be meaningful in their overall risk reduction strategy.
That clarifies the positioning perfectly. What of the other major players in the lipid profile, HDL and triglycerides?
The effects on HDL, the good cholesterol, are generally inconsistent across the high-quality meta-analyses. Some might show a slight, statistically insignificant increase, maybe 2 or 3 milli-GDL, but it is not a robust, repeatable finding.
And triglycerides.
Similarly, the effects on triglycerides are largely inconsistent or non-significant unless the participant starts with very high baseline triglyceride levels. In that case, a modest reduction is sometimes observed.
So why does garlic seem to selectively target LDL and total cholesterol production? What's the presumed lipid mechanism?
The primary mechanism is thought to involve the inhibition of hepatic cholesterol synthesis. That's cholesterol made in the liver. Garlic compounds are believed to partially suppress the activity of the enzyme HMG-CoA reductase.
Back to that central enzyme again. HMG-CoA reductase is the rate-limiting step in cholesterol synthesis, and it's the precise target of statin drugs.
It is. Garlic compounds likely function as a mild natural inhibitor of that same powerful pathway. By mildly slowing the liver's cholesterol factory, they reduce circulating total and LDL cholesterol. Plus, garlic provides powerful antioxidant effects that are crucial.
How so?
Because reducing the oxidation of LDL is arguably as important as reducing the mass of LDL itself. It contributes to a healthier environment in the vascular walls.
So we know garlic changes the numbers on a lab report, but does it actually affect the physical structure of our arteries? Does it slow the progression of the disease? This moves us from biomarkers to hard outcomes.
This is where the evidence becomes genuinely exciting. Garlic shows benefit in multiple physical markers of arterial damage, particularly when using aged garlic extract.
Okay. RCTs have measured arterial stiffness using objective metrics like central pulse wave velocity or PWV.
PWV measures how fast the pulse travels through the arteries.
Exactly. A faster pulse wave means stiffer, less flexible arteries. Studies using AG have consistently shown measurable improvements in PWV, indicating reduced arterial stiffness. This is a direct measure of mitigating vascular aging.
That's a crucial sign of better function. But let's get to the plaque itself, atherosclerosis. Does garlic actually slow down the physical buildup?
This is the most surprising detail. The most compelling evidence comes from a landmark 12-month trial, specifically focused on the progression of atherosclerosis in high-risk patients with metabolic syndrome.
And what did they do?
They gave them a high dose of 2,400 milligrams per day of aged garlic extract.
And what did that year-long intervention reveal about physical disease progression?
They monitored the progression of coronary artery calcium, or CAC scores. The CAC score is arguably the most powerful non-invasive measure of established atherosclerotic plaque burden in the coronary arteries.
And the results? The results were astounding. The AGE supplementation group showed a statistically significant 7.5% reduction in the progression of the Cox score compared to the placebo group.
Wait, a reduction in the progression means they were slowing down the speed at which plaque calcified and grew compared to the control group. That's a huge finding.
It is, because the CAS score is a foundational predictor of future heart events. Finding a supplement, a food derivative, that can slow the actual accumulation of calcified plaque in the arteries is a breakthrough.
And there was more, right, about soft plaque.
Right. The trial also observed a reduction in what is called low attenuation plaque burden, which are often the more vulnerable soft plaques prone to rupture. This links garlic directly to a physical structural outcome, slowing down the actual disease process beyond just the BP or cholesterol numbers.
This evidence, combining the reduced arterial stiffness with the slowing of measurable plaque progression, truly moves garlic into a therapeutic discussion for mitigating atherosclerosis risk.
Absolutely. The conclusion here is moderate certainty for cardiovascular structure benefits. But again, to bring it back to practical positioning, these are adjuncts. Garlic is a supportive therapy, not a replacement for the aggressive pharmaceutical management required by high-risk patients.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting, and where the chemistry dictates whether you get those benefits we just discussed. We've established that the health benefits are real, but the central problem of garlic research is, well, volatility. The efficacy depends entirely on which organosulfur compound the product delivers.
This is the biggest hurdle for the consumer. You can't just assume a generic pill will work, because the therapeutic compounds are fragile, temperamental, and processing dependent. We have to dive into the chemical differences between raw garlic, cooked garlic, aged garlic extract, and generic supplements.
Let's start with raw garlic and its notorious compound, allicin.
The Allicin story is a classic example of biochemical self-defense. Allicin itself is not actually present in the intact whole garlic clove. It's sequestered.
It's held dormant.
Exactly. It is only formed when the tissue is violently damaged, when you crush, chop, or chew the raw garlic. It's the plant's emergency response system.
So when the cell walls break,
They mix two previously separated components. The enzyme allinase with its substrate, align. This reaction instantly generates allicin. Allicin is responsible for that instantly recognizable sharp, pungent smell and is credited with potent antimicrobial and antihypertensive potential.
and the key issue is its extreme instability.
Yes. Allicin is highly reactive, highly volatile, and degrades rapidly. In a human gut environment, its half-life can be less than a minute. This is why researchers often can't measure allicin directly. They measure its metabolic byproduct in the breath called allyl-methyl sulfide.
And this rapid decomposition brings us to the famous and very practical 10-minute rule.
The 10-minute rule is crucial for maximizing the allicin potential in fresh garlic. When you crush the raw cloves, you activate the allinase enzyme, starting the allicin production clock. But allinase is extremely thermolable.
Sensitive to heat.
Very. If you immediately toss that crushed garlic into a pan of hot olive oil or into a boiling soup, heat above about 60 degrees Celsius or 140 Fahrenheit rapidly destroys the allinase enzyme.
So if the enzyme is destroyed before it's done its job,
Then the potency is drastically reduced. We're talking a 50 to 90% loss of potential allicin yield. Therefore, crushing the garlic and waiting 10 minutes before applying heat allows the enzymatic reaction to reach completion before the enzyme is irreversibly inactivated.
that is such a perfect kitchen hack that translates directly from complex chemistry. You have to wait for the magic to happen before you cook.
Right.
Now, let's pivot to the product that showed the most robust evidence in those clinical trials. Aged garlic extract, or AG. If allicin is the unstable potential, what is the stability delivered by AG?
This is the aged garlic extract story, a story of stability, consistency, and bioavailability. AG is produced by aging fresh sliced garlic in a 15-20% ethanol solution for long periods, sometimes 18 to 20 months.
And this process intentionally does what?
It intentionally destroys the allinase enzyme over time.
Wait, it destroys the enzyme. But the enzyme is crucial for allicin formation.
Exactly. The goal of AG production is to bypass the unstable allicin pathway entirely. The aging and fermentation process converts the allicin into highly stable, water-soluble compounds, primarily S-allyl-L-cysteine, or SAC.
So SAC is the star compound of AGE then.
It is. SAC is standardized in AG products used in the clinical trials, meaning you get a consistent dose every time. It is highly bioavailable, and importantly, it is odorless.
So the trials that showed all those great benefits were using a product with low or no allicin.
That's right. The trials standardized by SAC consistently showed reproducible benefits for blood pressure, plaque reduction, and immune function. This proves that garlic's benefits are mediated by a suite of organosulfur compounds, with SAC being highly effective, stable, and easy to dose.
Okay, so if you want Allicin's volatile power, you crush it raw and wait 10 minutes. If you want stable, guaranteed, odorless dosing that mirrors the clinical trial success, you choose AGE. Now, what about the common powdered supplements? This is where the bioavailability pitfalls really start.
They absolutely do. For garlic powder tablets to replicate the therapeutic effects observed in some studies, those attributed to allicin potential, they have to ensure the allicinase enzyme survives the journey through the highly acidic environment of the stomach.
Because acid, just like heat, rapidly destroys that sensitive enzyme.
Correct. Therefore, these tablets must be enteric-coated. The coating is designed to protect the enzyme from the low pH of stomach acid, allowing the tablet to survive intact and dissolve only in the higher pH environment of the small intestine.
Sounds like good engineering. Where does the process fall apart?
It falls apart because of the complexity of digestion, specifically influenced by meals. Bioavailability studies revealed a major pitfall. Enteric-coated tablets can have significantly reduced allicin bioavailability, sometimes up to a 45% reduction when taken with a high-protein meal.
Why does protein interact so negatively with the pill's pathway?
High-protein meals trigger the release of specific hormones and significantly delay a process called gastric emptying. Essentially, the digestive process slows down. The enteric-coated tablets end up sitting in the highly acidic stomach for a much longer time.
Sometimes for hours.
Yes, delayed by 2 to 6 hours. This prolonged exposure can compromise the coating, or the sheer delay in release means that whatever allicin is eventually formed is delayed past the peak window for absorption.
So someone trying to be health conscious takes their enteric-coated garlic pill with a high-protein breakfast, maybe eggs and a protein shake, and they are inadvertently sabotaging the pill's effectiveness.
That is exactly what the bioavailability studies confirm. The best way to optimize an enteric-coated allicin potential product is to take it on a completely empty stomach or with a light, non-protein heavy carbohydrate meal.
So for the listener who wants reliable results based on the highest certainty data, what's the final word?
The path is clear. If you are pursuing the cardiovascular benefits demonstrated in the most trusted research, you should choose a standardized aged garlic extract, AGE, which guarantees a certain level of stable L-cysteine. If you insist on the allicin pathway, you must carefully select a brand with independently validated allicin bioequivalence and pay strict attention to the timing of your meals. The form and processing are everything. You cannot assume garlic is garlic. So while cardiovascular benefits offer the most robust, high-certainty data, garlic does show promise in 2 other important areas: metabolic support, particularly for blood sugar, and mitigating the severity of common sickness.
Okay, let's start with metabolic health, focusing on type 2 diabetes. Given the massive overlap between T2DM and cardiovascular risk, any improvement here would perfectly complement the BP and lipid benefits. What does the evidence show for glucose control?
The evidence here is generally rated as moderate to low certainty. The effect sizes are small, but they are generally consistent and positive. Meta-analyses of RCTs specifically involving people with T2DM show measurable, modest reductions in both fasting blood glucose and HbA1c.
Can we quantify that? What's the magnitude of that glucose-lowering effect?
Pooled effects show real, albeit subtle, reductions. For fasting blood glucose, studies typically reported a reduction of approximately 9 to 21 milligrams per deciliter after 12 to 24 weeks of consistent use.
And for HbA1c, the 3-month average?
For HbA1c, reductions are typically modest, around 0.3 to 0.6%.
A drop of up to 21 milli-GDL in fasting glucose, or even half a percentage point in HbA1c over several months, is definitely significant for a non-pharmaceutical intervention.
It is. And this improvement is often coupled with a reduction in OPA-IR, which is a key marker suggesting better insulin sensitivity in these patients. The proposed mechanisms mirror the general benefits: potent antioxidant effects, improved glucose uptake, and inhibition of advanced glycation end products.
So, should a person with diabetes view this as a primary glucose-lowering therapy?
Emphatically no. Just as with cardiovascular disease, garlic supplements must be treated strictly as complementary to, not a replacement for, established glucose-lowering therapy.
It's an adjunctive tool.
An adjunctive tool for metabolic support. If you have T2DM, you must discuss this with your doctor before starting any regimen.
Now let's move to immunity, which is often the most intuitive use for garlic. You know, that tradition of reaching for it when you feel a cold coming on. What does rigorous science say?
This area is supported by some prominent, specific, high-quality trials. One key RCT involved 120 healthy adults during cold and flu season. They used a very high dose of aged garlic extract, 2.56 grams per day, for 90 consecutive days.
2.5 grams of AGE per day, that's a substantial regimen.
Mm-hmm.
A standard capsule is often 300 milligrams, so we're talking about taking 8 or 9 capsules per day.
Exactly. It's a therapeutic high dose. And the findings were twofold. First, on the immunological level, they found that AGE significantly improved innate immune cell function. Participants showed increased proliferation and activity of specific immune components.
Which components specifically?
Specifically, natural killer cells, or NK cells, and gamma delta T cells. NK cells are the immune system's rapid response team. They seek out and destroy virally infected cells.
Right.
And gamma delta T cells are a specialized group of T lymphocytes that act as a bridge between the innate and adaptive immune systems. Boosting their proliferation is a significant sign of a more vigilant immune response.
That sounds like a clear enhancement of the immune system's cellular hardware.
Yeah.
But what was the actual clinical outcome? Did people taking this high dose of garlic catch fewer colds?
And here is the crucial practical nuance for the listener. The trial found that AG supplementation reduced the severity and duration of cold and flu symptoms.
Okay, so fewer symptoms, fewer missed work days.
Yes. People had fewer overall symptom counts, fewer days they were functionally impaired. However, and this is critical, it did not reduce the incidence of contracting a cold or flu.
That is an extremely important distinction. Garlic did not act as a preventative shield against contracting the virus. But once the infection landed, it helped the body manage and clear it much faster.
Precisely. The takeaway is a strong severity reduction signal, not a preventive shield against contraction. It seems to help your immune system mount a more robust, faster response to the existing viral threat, thereby reducing the functional impact of the illness.
We've established that garlic has real, evidence-backed benefits for the heart, blood vessels, and potentially for mitigating cold severity. But now we need to address the vast number of other claims, things like cancer prevention, longevity, and even brain health. Let's use the clinical grade rating system to manage expectations clearly.
This is where we pump the brakes significantly. Many of the most extravagant claims have very low certainty evidence, or literally zero human clinical evidence from RCTs. It is important to understand the difference between promising preclinical data and what we can actually recommend based on human trials.
Let's start with one of the biggest traditional claims, cancer prevention. What does the robust human evidence tell us?
The evidence for cancer prevention is currently very low certainty and highly inconsistent. Historically, epidemiological studies, large population surveys, suggested links to lower gastric and colorectal cancer risk.
But those observational links are fraught with variables, aren't they? How do we know it wasn't something else in their diet?
You hit the nail on the head. These are highly susceptible to confounding. People who habitually eat a lot of fresh garlic usually have an overall healthier diet and lifestyle.
So what happened when they tried to validate this with intervention trials?
The data became sparse and mixed. We have only one medium-quality randomized controlled trial that focused on a surrogate endpoint, not actual cancer incidence, but the formation of precancerous lesions. That trial showed a reduction in the number and size of colorectal adenomas with high-dose AGE.
So one promising signal on a proxy outcome, but nowhere near enough to conclude causality or make a firm recommendation.
Absolutely insufficient. While the anti-cancer mechanisms are incredibly strong in lab models, those findings have not reliably translated into consistent human prevention yet.
Okay, moving to the largest claim, longevity and mortality. If garlic helps the heart and blood vessels so effectively, surely it helps people live longer.
Logically, one would infer that, but in terms of direct proof, we only have very low certainty evidence, as it is strictly observational. We don't have RCTs that can track thousands of people for 20 years.
What does the observational data show, even with that huge grain of salt?
One large prospective cohort study in very old Chinese adults found that frequent habitual consumption was indeed associated with lower all-cause mortality, with hazard ratios suggesting an 8 to 11% reduced risk.
That's intriguing, but again, association is not causation.
Exactly. The limitation remains severe. Confounding cannot be ruled out. We only infer potential longevity benefits indirectly, based on the strong data for lowering blood pressure and stabilizing plaque.
Finally, let's address mental health and cognition. Does garlic support the brain or prevent decline?
The evidence here is near the bottom of the confidence hierarchy. Very low certainty to no evidence. On the cognitive front, we have one recent, small, short-term human RCT using AGE that suggested a potential modest improvement in global cognitive function.
But that's a singular small-scale trial.
Yes, and it needs vast replication.
And what about specific mood disorders, depression or anxiety?
There are virtually zero robust human RCTs supporting garlic for treating depression or anxiety. Claims in this area are based entirely on preclinical animal models showing certain neuroprotective effects.
But the leap from a stressed-out mouse to a human suffering from clinical depression is enormous, and you're saying completely unsubstantiated by rigorous clinical data.
Exactly. The conclusion is clear. Based on current, reliable human data, garlic should not be recommended for any psychological or major cognitive disorder. We have to responsibly stick to where the moderate to high quality evidence leads us, the heart and blood vessels. So now that we have established the robust benefits and the evidence gaps, let's quickly cover the safety profile, which is generally quite favorable.
Right. Garlic is a staple food used across the globe, so it's generally safe.
That's correct. Garlic supplements in clinical trials are generally well tolerated, especially AGE, which is processed to be odorless. The safety profile for common minor side effects is high certainty.
What are the primary trade-offs people might encounter?
The commonest side effects are minor GI symptoms, bloating, flatulence, mild heartburn reported in about 7 to 10% of participants, and of course the classic side effect, odor,
Halitosis and body odor.
reported in up to 30% of participants, particularly with products that have high allicin potential. This is often the trade-off for pursuing the allicin pathway versus the odorless SAC pathway of AGE.
Let's move to the most crucial safety area, critical drug interactions. This is vital information for anyone on medication.
Yes. Because garlic has demonstrated mild antiplatelet effects, it slightly inhibits the body's ability to form blood clots. We must exercise high caution if you are concurrently taking anticoagulants or antiplatelet drugs like warfarin, aspirin, or clopidogrel.
So it's a theoretical increased risk of bleeding. Has it been confirmed?
The evidence is mixed, which is why caution is necessary. While there are isolated case reports, a controlled pilot trial of AGE with warfarin showed no increased bleeding risk. However, given the plausible mechanism, high-dose supplementation must be monitored closely by a physician.
What about other less obvious drug interactions involving metabolism?
This is a key safety point. Garlic supplements may induce or enhance the activity of specific liver enzymes, particularly the CYP3A4 enzymes. This is a major pathway for clearing numerous prescription drugs.
Which specific drug classes are problematic here?
This induction is particularly problematic for certain medications, notably some HIV protease inhibitors, such as saquinavir.
And if the liver enzyme activity is enhanced, what's the consequence?
When the CYP3A4 enzyme is induced, it clears the protease inhibitor drug much faster than normal. This can drastically reduce the plasma levels of the HIV drug in some studies by up to 50%, potentially making the medication ineffective. Concurrent use must be strictly avoided.
And finally, a reminder for anyone planning elective surgery.
Absolutely. Due to the antiplatelet effects and the theoretical bleeding risk, the universal clinical advice is to discontinue all high-dose garlic supplements 7 to 10 days prior to any elective surgery.
This has been an incredibly deep and detailed look. Let's finish by giving the listener 4 concrete, actionable steps based strictly on the moderate and high certainty evidence we've covered.
Okay, here are the 4 most actionable, evidence-based steps for you, the learner. First, for blood pressure management. If you have hypertension, discuss adding a standardized aged garlic extract supplement with your clinician. The successful doses typically target around 480 milligrams per day of AGE, yielding about 1.2 milligrams of SAC.
Okay, number 2.
Second, for reducing cold severity. To leverage the immunomodulatory effects, use a higher dose AGE regimen during cold and flu season. The evidence-backed dose is substantial 2.56 grams per day. And remember, this is to reduce severity and duration, not to prevent getting sick in the first place.
And for culinary use.
Third, for maximizing culinary benefit. If you rely on fresh, raw garlic in your cooking, always adhere to the 10-minute rule. Crush or chop the cloves, then let them stand for 10 minutes before you apply heat. If you skip this, you lose much of the potential benefit.
And finally, the 4th takeaway.
Fourth, manage expectations. Recognize that while garlic provides measurable benefits for cholesterol and glucose, those effects are modest. Garlic supplements are complementary supportive tools, but they are not replacements for established guideline therapies like statins and antihypertensives, particularly in high-risk individuals.
That shifts the entire conversation around garlic from ancient folklore right into modern pharmacology. Garlic isn't a magical cure-all, but specific, standardized preparations, particularly aged garlic extract, are a legitimate, evidence-backed adjunctive tool for cardiovascular risk management.
Absolutely. The science supports garlic as a therapeutic agent. But as we look forward, we have to acknowledge the final critical research gap that remains open. Most of the consistent evidence we've discussed today focuses on surrogate endpoints.
Changes on a lab sheet.
Right. Blood pressure, lipids, biomarkers, plaque progression scores. The numbers look great, but they aren't necessarily a prevented heart attack or stroke.
So what's missing?
We still critically lack the high-quality, long-term RCTs, the gold standard trials lasting 2 to 5 years or more, that confirm whether these modest benefits translate into a reduced risk for the true hard clinical outcomes, like myocardial infarction, stroke, or all-cause mortality.
We're highly confident it lowers blood pressure, but we are still inferring that the long-term benefit for survival is there.
Exactly. That translation from biomarker success to clinical event reduction remains the most important frontier of garlic research.
That leaves us with a final provocative thought, particularly regarding that crucial 10-minute crushing rule for fresh garlic. Given how profoundly sensitive garlic's active compounds are to heat, acid, and processing, what if the simple, deliberate act of choosing to use crushed, raw garlic in a meal?
The ritual of it.
Yes, the ritual of waiting 10 minutes, the choice of using fresh ingredients. What if that inherently signals a wider dedication to health and dietary habits? Perhaps this conscious choice, this ritual, is inseparable from a portion of the long-term health benefits we observe in those big epidemiological studies.
The conscious decision to prioritize food quality and preparation may be the unwritten benefit we can't quantify in a pill.
Food for thought, indeed. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the robust science of Allium sativa. We hope you feel well-informed and perhaps slightly inspired to let your crushed garlic rest before you turn on the heat.